And we're live. It is Friday, January 17th, the year of many of our Lord, 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. There is no cactus today. There is no other co-host that I know of. I don't know if any guest is going to show up, but you are watching Dog Shirt TV. And it is the kind of revolution in morning television where sometimes we have a show where, no one's going to show up and, I don't even know if anybody's going to ask questions or if I'm just going to talk continuously for an hour, which if you have never done that, particularly without looking somebody in the eye and having a sense of your audience and their engagement level, let me tell you, that is a complicated little business. But we soldier on because this is Dog Shirt TV. We start on time, we end on time. Sometimes we end early because there are no guests, there are no hosts, and there are no questions. But we start on time, and even 3 days, T-minus 3 days until the apocalypse, we got, I guess it's 3 days. We got Saturday at noon, Sunday at noon, and then the apocalypse is Monday at noon. We do it anyway. Now, an administrative announcement. There's not going to be a show on Monday because it's a national holiday, and I don't mean Inauguration Day. I mean MLK Day, and so we're actually going to miss the apocalypse on Dog Shirt TV. No, we're not going wall to wall with buntings and commentators. We're not doing any of that. We're just going to miss it, and on Tuesday at 8 a.m. we will have a show. But this is the last show until the apocalypse. And I was trying to think of what the appropriate apocalypse song is. And I suppose there are so many options. It might be It's the End of the World as We Know It. It might be I can think of so many options. Maybe Don Giovanni's Descent into Hell at the end of Act 2. But the point is, the next time I talk to you guys, we will be Don Giovanni having descended into hell. We will be, and the statue will have come and grabbed us and dragged us down. That's all on Tuesday. But today is, the last day that we will be together as, cheerful pre-dragged to hell. It's like the ball in Don Giovanni at the beginning, except we're not gonna rape anybody. Just think about it. This is the last weekday, and the next time, the next work week is the apocalypse. And I think you should so just sit with that for a minute. Yesterday I went to 2 events. The first of the events was the farewell ceremony at the Justice Department and reception for Merrick Garland. And the second was the last meeting and dinner of a DHS intelligence task force that I have been on for the last couple years. This advisory group was put together by the very estimable Ken Weinstein, who is the Undersecretary for Intelligence at DHS. And he asked me to serve on this because, both because, it's a very lawfare subject, but also, of course, because this unit had filed intelligence reports on me during the last Trump administration. And Ken asked me to serve on this task force or this advisory committee, and I did so. And last night over dinner, we had our final meeting, which was very moving to be part of. Uh, of course, the political leadership of DHS, including Ken, turn into pumpkins on Monday at noon. And the as has been publicly reported, the amount of transition activity from the incoming administration has been so minimal that, nobody really knows anything about what's going to happen on Monday. And that's true across the government. There's just very little communication about what the incoming people have in mind. And they have had, across the government, minimal communication between landing teams, except in discrete areas, I think, where, the administrations apparently worked very closely together on the Gaza ceasefire. But that's a bit of an exception. The norm in most of these agencies is very minimal communication, and tends to be, and again, we're hearing this from across the government, tends to be about DEI stuff, not about the substantive areas of that the current administration is dealing with, and the future administration is going to have to deal with. So this is a group of people that none of us were paid a dime. We were asked by Ken, who all of us feel very strongly about. I think extremely highly of Ken. And we were asked to serve on this, and it's a pretty diverse group in terms of its expertise, everything from people who've run intelligence agencies of various sorts to civil libertarians and a few freaks like me. And yes, I did wear a dog shirt to every meeting of this group, except yesterday, where I wore a suit and tie because I had just come from the Justice Department. But the point is that we got together every few months or once a quarter to sit around for a day and get really, really high quality presentations from the folks at DHS INA, the intelligence unit at DHS, and to bat around ideas and give advice about some very hard problems that this tiny little agency confronts. And it was, I'm not saying anything about, who's a member of this group is public, and you can look it up, but I am trying to be very respectful of the confidentiality and not talk about, who was there or whatever. It's no secret. But I'm not going to talk about the substance of matters just out of respect for, there's nothing classified. There's nothing, not that I'm cleared for classified material anyway, but there's nothing sensitive about it. I'm just being respectful of others. There was just a real sense of that this is an agency that needs some help. This is a person who has asked for our help, and we should all do it. And we all did it. And it was a great pleasure. It was fun. They were fun, really fun to work with, and uh, it was hard to say goodbye. Actually, we all expect we will all be dismissed next week or the week after. It may take a little while. Um, uh, we maybe the thing will be disbanded altogether, or maybe we will all be fired, just dismissed from it, so that we can be replaced with, I don't know whom. Uh, but it was a pleasure to work with this group of people and to be helpful to the folks at INA who, it's an agency I have a little bit of a weird relationship. It's the only U.S. intelligence agency that has ever violated my civil liberties. And I caused a little scandal for them. And, ooh, Richard, you okay? Um, I'll take that as a yes.
I'm okay.
Yeah, I do that all the time. Um, and, you know, then they called me up and said, can you help us? They'd already cleaned it up, honestly, but can you help us think through some hard problems? And, that's the way the government should work. When screw ups happen, you get somebody who is very capable, who cleans it up, and then thinks imaginatively about how the agency should be doing its job. So I will have more to say about Merrick Garland in my column this afternoon. I do, as I said in Dogshirt Daily last night, I do really recommend people watch or read his speech. But I want to give a special shout out this morning to Ken Weinstein, who is a Republican, by the way, who took a job as deputy or as undersecretary for intelligence at DHS, which is, arguably beneath the level that he should be confirmed and serving at. This is somebody who's a extremely distinguished national security lawyer who's run NSD at Justice. He's been the U.S. attorney here. And he took this job because this agency needed a little help. He took it not in a Trump administration, but in a Biden administration, and he did a magnificent job. And so, cheers, Ken, and job well done. And I hear that INA, this little intelligence agency, will be releasing today a formal set of policies, which is a very good thing to do, and makes it a little bit harder to willy-nilly just spy on people if there are policies that state when you do and don't do such things. Richard, it's good to see you. You're muted.
Am I still muted? Oh, I'm not. Okay. Good morning. Morning.
Good morning.
Ev has materialized like a materializing Ev.
It's a softball. And it's probably more nice than the answer because I don't. Very. So, under what authority does when impose care? What's the process that actually the process for that to happen? Just in the past, we say Canada, 20% on everything coming in
All right. So you say that as though it is obvious that he can't, except that he can. And this is not a constitutional authority; it's a statutory authority. So the authority to levy taxes is a congressional one, obviously. Uh, but and for most of American history, or about half of American history, the power to tax really was the power to do tariffs because we didn't have an income tax until the early part of the 20th century. Um, and so tariffs, are supposed to be a sort of a nimble instrument. And so Congress basically delegated that authority to a considerable degree to the president. And this has been mostly a non-problem for the last, 70 years, really, uh, because presidents don't use it much. And they tend to use it, when China is is engaged in a predatory market behavior, right? Or when you're trying to, sometimes there's a protectionist element to it. You're trying to shield the blank industry from, rapacious undercutting from X country. And then every now and then there's a genuine national security reason to, make sure we have our own supply of uranium or whatever. And so the Congress has never really had occasion to say, hey, should we repeal the president's authority to impose tariffs? Because presidents don't go around pointing at allies and saying, Ev, you're tariffed, and they tend to be, sort of useful instruments in trade disputes, including with a lot of countries that have all kinds of protectionist barriers against us. For example, Japan and South Korea have not always played fair. The sort of Asian model of trade development has often involved highly protectionist activities. And so there's some value to having a kind of nimble, expertise driven imposition. And but we've never had a president who said, all right, let's put a 20% tariff on everything and 100% tariff on, Denmark because they won't give us Greenland, and whether if Trump does that rather than merely talks about it, I mean, first of all, he'll plunge the country into a major recession. At least if he does it in a blanket fashion rather than a sort of targeted fashion. But secondly, I would think Congress would have to revisit the unilateral tariff authority of the president.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's still scary.
Oh yeah. It's not a good thing. All right. Welcome, Ev.
Thank you. How's it going? Well, actually, I have a question before. Don't you think it sounds like wishful thinking to say that Congress would have to change the taxing power? Like, will it really be the first thing that they change in 4 years from now?
Well, Congress does, first of all, it moves very slowly, except when it doesn't. And if you imagine a situation in which Trump used the tariff power in a fashion that was substantially injurious to large numbers of Americans as opposed to large numbers of Canadians or large numbers of, Greenlanders or Danes. Um, that's the kind of thing that provokes an electoral backlash. And, if you have a whole lot of people who are suddenly unemployed because economic activity slows down and prices go way up on certain things because they require softwood lumber from Canada, and we just slapped a you know ridiculous tariff on it for no good reason. um you're talking about the kind of thing that people react against um in elections, and that's the kind of thing that produces congressional action. Now, in his prior use of tariffs, Trump actually didn't do that. What he did was um, protected certain industries, particularly the steel industry, the aluminum industry, and um, and that's the kind of thing that you know raises prices and reduces economic activity in general, but in a very diffuse way. And it definitely has beneficial effects for US steel producers who employ people. And so the people who experience the result of the tariff experience it as a positive, and the negative, which, is substantial, is diffused over huge numbers of people who don't even notice it. And so, if you do tariffs that way, it is it can be a clever way to advantage people that you want to advantage to protect industries. And, I don't even know if it's the worst thing in the world to do that, right? It's a trade in the economic space like any other trade in the economic space, which is, you help some people at the expense of having slightly higher taxes on things, right? So that you protect, you have a social safety net, but taxes are a little higher, right? You have protections for jobs for certain steel workers, but the price of, steel is a little bit higher, and it reduces marginally certain economic activity. So I think it very much depends how he does it. And like everything with Trump, there is the rhetoric, which is always irresponsible and often disgusting. And then there's the reality, which is sometimes as bad as the rhetoric and often not as bad as the rhetoric. And so, will there be some kind of actions on tariffs? Yes. Will I support it? Almost certainly not. Will it be catastrophic or merely a thing? Who knows? And I think one of the keys to surviving the Trump era is not panicking about things until it's time to panic, and just living with a certain uncertainty about, are we at DEFCON 5, or are we at DEFCON 3, or are we at DEFCON 2? Where are you on the alarmometer scale, and not going higher than, or lower if we're using DEFCON, not going lower than you need to go before you need to go there. And so my view of tariffs is I'm not going to react based off of his rhetoric. I'm going to react based off of what they do, what are the tariffs they announce, and what do reasonable economists say that is going to be the effect of this. Also, just I'm going to let Canada represent Canada, and I'm going to let South Korea represent South Korea, and I'm going to let Japan represent Japan. And my metric for whether these things are very destructive, a little bit destructive, or trivial is going to be how these will help or hurt two things. One is the American economy, and two is our relationship with our allies and trading partners. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if the fact that our politicians are fearing the imposition, having big tariffs, really does change the leadership race and the elections and all of this. So my fear is that it could lead Canada, for instance, to elect a more populist leader to fight. And I'm not talking about Pierre Poilievre per se. I'm just recently there's a billionaire who was announced that he would be joining the leadership race for the Liberal Party, claiming that he would be the good person to negotiate with Trump, because if he shows up at the negotiation table with Trump, then Trump would respect us while he wouldn't respect any other leader. But having a prime minister elected simply on the basis of he's capable of negotiating with Trump kind of makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, well, it should. And this is like so this is a really interesting ripple effect of Trumpism, right? Is that it affects other countries not because US policy actually changes, but because people orient their policy or propose to orient their policy on what's the most effective way to deal with Trump. And of course, because Trump hasn't done anything yet, and we don't actually know whether dealing with Trump in that sense is going to be a major need for Canada, right? It will be a need, but it was a need in the first Trump administration that Justin Trudeau was handled very ably, actually. And, you know, it's not clear to me at all that it's not well within the rolling with punches capacity of your average senior Canadian politician. On the other hand, the fact that we're dealing with this, affects the way Canadian politicians run for office and within the Canadian political system. And by the way, that's true in other countries too. A big question in Ukraine is, how do we deal with an incoming Trump administration? And in that case, the issue is not tariffs. It's, literally life or death for a large number of people and for the country, the terms of settlement of armed conflict of the country itself. So I think this is happening kind of all over the world in democratic countries anyway. And I will give the following advice, not specifically to Canada, but to all countries contemplating this, which is, don't assume that everything that gets said, or even a large percentage of what gets said, is important. A huge percentage of it is noise. And isolating what the real issues are that actually involve policy, and how much of it, that's a challenge. That's the challenge of the first year. And nobody, by the way, nobody gets it right. So if you were the Prime Minister of Denmark in in 2017 and you ran this tabletop exercise of what are going to be the frictions with the new Trump administration, not 1 in 100 people you got together in that exercise is going to say, oh, he's going to demand Greenland, right? Like, the real issues often come out of left field. And so what we're talking about today and what we're dealing with next week may be only very dimly related. So that's, that's the reason that or one of the reasons that I always say, deal with what happens, not with what is promised. You're dealing with a pathological. It's not even a liar because, he doesn't. It's really, in a more Harry Frankfurt sense, a bullshitter, right? Nothing that he says has any real meaning at all in terms of what he aspires to do, except tonally and kind of directionally. And so, you can definitely anticipate that there will be trade frictions. But beyond that, you can't plan for it. All you can do is ready yourself for the need to be nimble and creative. I think that's it. So what's on your mind this morning, as opposed to what's on Richard Wattenbarger's mind this morning?
What's on my mind? Well, there's one thing that is Canada and politics related. Sorry for all the people in the crowd, in the audience, who might be kind of annoyed with the amount of Canadian stuff on.
So wait a minute. I want to pause over that because this has come up before. Do we have too much Canada stuff and too much Finland stuff on this show? Answer, no. And if people want a different balance on Dogshirt TV, they should bring people from other countries. You want a more U.S. politics based? Ask more U.S. politics question. You want Liechtenstein representation? Call your frickin' friends in Liechtenstein and tell them to start showing up on the show. You want more, South Korean impeachment discussion? Look, it's evening in South Korea. This is a great time for South Koreans to show up on the show and talk about, and I don't know enough about the impeachment in South Korea to have a good conversation about this. But this show is for the people who watch it, and it's for the people who participate in it. And the way we guide what the show is about is through host and audience participation. I didn't show up today thinking we were going to be talking about tariffs, but Richard showed up and brought up good tariffs questions, and Ev continued that. And so to everybody who's saying, why do we have so much Canada? It's because Ev and Alicia show up, and you don't want so much Canada stuff, or you want to change the balance. Show up. Bring your Brunei politics discussions to the show. Bring your Slovak politics to the show. I'm game for it all, but we are guided here by the rule of the actively engaged, and Ev is the picture of the actively engaged, and that means we're going to be a little more Canadian, and specifically a little more francophone Canadian for those of you Vancouverites. And so, Ev, back to what you were saying, with no apologies, please.
Fine. Well, yeah. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Facebook has an ad library for advertising on its platform. And I've kind of looked into it. And at the moment, given the current context, of course, these are the conservative are those who are funding and using the platform more to advertise. And there are some weird things that are happening, seems to be happening, and not only on the conservative funding things, but also on other like third parties that are related. So Canada Proud, which is kind of somewhat related to the truckers. And I've seen in the chat John Aukison asking why everything is about Quebec and Ontario. And truth is, because it's not only on Dogshit TV that everything is on is about Quebec and Ontario. This is exactly the complaint that Vancouverites would have. They also think that in general everything focuses on the middle of Canada more than anything else. So you've just had a regular Canadian experience.
It is fair to point out as well that between Quebec and Ontario, you've accounted for some enormous percentage of the entire Canadian population, with all due respect to friends and family who live in BC. Most of Canada is a big empty space, and Quebec and Ontario are not.
So yeah. Hey, good morning,
Speaking
Alicia.
of Ontario, you speak about Ontario, and Alicia Wanless just materializes like a specter, leaping out of the Ontario gloaming. I was saying nice things. I was saying that Ontario isn't overrepresented.
Listen, there's a good book that I can't possibly remember right now that I'm going to have to find after I stop talking about enduring grievances in Canada post-Confederation and how like long-standing they are and how they don't go away. We aren't quite as fragmented, I think, as a country as the Americans are, but we definitely have some issues in our togetherness.
Yeah, I mean, you have a modern separatist movement. We don't have any of those. I mean, it's like 8 people. I mean, there's no substantial movement for Texas independence. Whereas you guys have an actual independence movement that's been the orienting point for a major political party since the year I was born.
That could be the official opposition.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. But anyway, Ev, you were saying.
Yeah, well, the thing is that I noticed some stuff that is kind of they seem to be funding ads in very targeted region around Brampton and Surrey/Vancouver. So Toronto and Vancouver. And if you look at postal code, it really maps pretty closely with where there have been fights between Sikh and different communities in India. And I'm wondering if it doesn't look like what the IRA was doing in the US.
Oh, so that's super interesting. So these are targeting areas where there have been Sikh what other than Indian government officials sponsoring assassinations of Sikhs in Vancouver has been going on in those communities that are, from a IRA-like point of view, worth exploiting?
Well, there has been at least one stabbing, and I know that they were some Indian officials going in these locations for like administrative stuff, and they had to like make false identities for them because otherwise it would have been dangerous for them to be in these areas. I haven't looked at it properly yet, but I definitely feel like there's some actual tensions and potential like explosive encounters
And that
in these
somebody
places.
is coming in and funding ads to exploit that?
Well, it's a question I'm raising.
So it's super interesting, and you should poke around about it. It's a uh, I mean, I think the obvious question would be who's doing it, right? Is it an internal Canadian kind of Willie Horton like thing, or is it an external actor, either of the Russia IRA variety, just stoke whatever communal tensions there are, or a more targeted Indian thing, as in, these are our enemies, let's fuck with them. I have no hypothesis myself, but I think anytime you have ads targeting a particular set of communities that seem to be exploiting or stoking communal tensions, the obvious question in a all the president's men sense is follow the money. Who's putting those ads there, and what are they saying exactly?
But as Alicia just mentioned to me earlier, it's also these are writings. We have huge Indian populations, and it might just be the case that they want to be elected there. And I don't know exactly how to make the difference. Like, how would I probe this to see if it's just like normal politic behavior, or is it more something like shady?
Well, so there's a few things. One is, what is the substance of the message being communicated, right? What is being said? The second is, who is being targeted with the message? Are these messages going to the Sikh community? Are they going to non-Sikhs about Sikhs, right? Are they something else, right? What is being said? Who is it being said to? And then the third question, which can be the hardest to pin down, is who's saying it, right? And then you can evaluate some group or individual created those ads. Who is that group? Whose money is being spent? These are the investigative questions you would want to answer to think about that.
We have an entire paper
question.
on that.
Hello, Alicia Wanless, former hockey fan.
Wow, we're getting questions
Latvian
about what is
nationalist.
ex-hockey.
Yeah, so Alicia used to be a hockey fan, but then, because she's Canadian, so she had to be a hockey fan, but then the Latvian kids kicked the Canadian kids'
Also,
ass,
the
and so
Americans
she
really
doesn't
handed it
watch
to us,
hockey
but that's
anymore.
a different issue. That's just the World Juniors. Ev, question: these ads,
Yeah.
they were taken out by the Conservative Party, aren't they, on Facebook?
Yeah, but not only. So that's what I'm looking into, but definitely conservative there, a lot of them. Also, like Canada Proud seem to be targeting the same region, the same postal codes.
It's
which
not
is
the population.
like,
I think there's such a high target of like that audience.
No.
That's where they live, in Burnaby and in Brampton. So it would make sense. Like if you were going to do targeted ads and you know where a certain demographic lives, that's completely normal. Oh,
yeah, but Canada Proud
is related.
Totally related.
Are we talking about Canada Proud and Ontario Proud?
Oh,
and entire? Yeah. I have a paper on this as well. It's old. These guys have been around for a long time. So they started out like 2016, 2017, not quite sure on the exact date. The Ontario Proud specifically, but I think that they're connected to Canada Proud. They were started by a former Conservative staffer. And then they gained a lot of popularity over the years. They had a higher popularity, still do, I think, than most of the candidate pages and the campaign pages, like the political party pages. And they have...
Yeah, it's related to the Conservative, but is it related to, like, is their targeted audience is immigrant?
No,
or is
their
it more
targeted
like...
audience is basically... Okay, how to explain this? They're like a third-party vehicle for campaigning for the Conservatives. So they're going to target whoever the conservatives are also interested in
okay.
targeting. So if you've got a liberal riding that's, say, my bigger question here is what's the language that's being used? Because I think you told me that they're actually not targeting Sikhs. They're targeting like other, yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. So the point is spending time on Facebook's ad tracker, looking at the way different communities are being targeted, being talked to by different communities, domestic and foreign, is a very productive way to spend your internet stalker energy. And it's really, I mean, a very fruitful way to spend time. We once, my friend Lisa Kaplan once discovered, which we published on Lawfare, a Russian origin Cypriot based, Cyprus based organization that still is getting literally billions of YouTube and Facebook hits and followers, making little crafts videos, and then using those pages to occasionally distribute Russian propaganda. And we ran a long expose about this. So these are very worth doing with both a certain amount of political sophistication about who the actors are and also a certain amount of technical sophistication about what you can and can't get from Facebook's ad disclosures. What is on your mind this morning, Alicia Wanless?
Making sure that Benjamin Wittes is not alone on his daily TV show.
So that was super kind of you both. Richard Wattenbarger, I sent out a distress call this morning because we didn't have a guest and I wasn't sure whether any co-hosts were showing up. But then I started the show all by myself, having not heard confirmation that anybody was coming on. And immediately Richard Wattenbarger showed up with a very interesting question about tariffs. And just as we were starting to talk about that, Ev showed up and we had a continued conversation about tariffs and then about Canadian politics. And then you showed up. And so this turned into an all-Canada show, first because of the actions of a non-Canadian, which is to say Richard showing up and wanting to talk about tariffs. The Canadians
always come. You see, we've got your backs. I'd like to remind all NATO members that this is the case.
Look, the Canadians show up, the Finns show up, and there's a metaphor here, for who's got our backs when the things, look, it's a reality that on Dogshirt TV, the nation of Canada, French and English speaking alike, in a united, a free and independent Quebec in a totally united Canada, all is, just dramatically overperforms in Dogshirt TV, as does the entire nation of Finland, by the way. I mean, which, pound for pound, and I'm looking at you, Antti Ruokonen, Finland is not in co-hosting, but in just as a percentage of Dogshirt TV participation. It's really astonishing between Minna Olander and Antti Ruokonen.
How many Finnish Alicia. Canadians are there?
There are probably more Finnish Canadians than Finns.
There's
How many
not
Finnish
more Finnish
Canadians are
Canadians
there?
than there are Finns, but there's a sizable community, mostly in Northern Ontario, which is not very densely populated, I might add. 144,055. That was our last census. That's like 3% of Finland's
Wow.
population.
And what makes up,
Raven.
like, what's the definition of a Finnish Canadian? Is it somebody of Finnish extraction, or is it somebody who is, um, Canada's really different from the United States in this, that people retain their ethnic identities over many generations in a way that we do not. There are still Ukrainian speaking people in Saskatchewan. Um, uh, what is the
So
definition
the
of a Finnish
Canadian
Canadian?
census does theirs a bit differently than the Americans, which I appreciate and like and think other countries should adopt. Ethnicity is a question that's self-selecting. So you can choose whatever you feel your origins to be. And that includes saying you're just Canadian or a Quebecois or a Maritimer. So it is people who have self-selected to say that they feel their origins, their ethnicity is Finnish. So it could be somebody who emigrated directly from Finland, and it
I
could be
see.
somebody who came, their parents, their great grandparents came, or ancestors came 100 years ago.
Interesting. Well, back when I was 14, I went out to visit my uncle, John Turk, who was living in Montana, still lives in Montana, but was living in a old ghost town that once had been a mining town, and it had been taken over by some environmentalist hippies, and they were living in it. And there was one resident um, whose name I believe was Udi, who was an 85-year-old. He was the last resident of the town when it was a mining town, and he had just never left. And he was a Finn who had been living there since, I think, the 20s or 30s, and still didn't speak English. He was a Finnish-speaking resident of Montana, and was misanthropic and uh, entirely uh, I don't know. He was a real hermit, and he lived in this town surrounded by, I don't know, 15 or so houses occupied by hippies, including my uncle and his then wife, who were all ski bums. And I remember, like, vividly, this old Finnish miner and who couldn't speak to anybody, and what he must have thought of these weirdos who had moved into his town.
Well, Finns
But they
are
all
like a
got
nation
along.
of introverts. So he might have just been like completely in his element, like, leave me alone.
Yes, there you go. But also to have no, basically no language communication with people, right? To live, it must have been hundreds of miles before you could get to another person who spoke Finnish. Um, so that's
Maybe he was just pretending, though. An introvert
He
pretending
was
not to
like,
speak
I don't
English.
want to talk
I
to you.
I assume. I mean, he had enough basic communication skills to, like, do day-to-day business, but
Oh,
like I talked to him, but it wasn't like somebody you he didn't have the kind of English that you could have a real conversation. It was more like, can I borrow your hatchet? Sure, that sort of thing.
I pretend not to understand languages all the
Yeah,
time.
Southern Cross, Southern Cross, Montana, outside of the bizarrely named town of Anaconda. Um, I'll never forget it.
We just borrowed a lot of names in Canada when it wasn't very creative, unfortunately. But I feel like you guys kind of got a bit weird out west.
Oh, yeah. Well, you guys got weird out
everywhere.
west, too.
Like, I'm not sure morning program's the time to start bringing up Canadian town names like Dildo, Newfoundland.
Right. Well, Newfoundland, a lot of things are weird in Newfoundland. I love Newfoundland. I was there when I was a kid, and I've always wanted to go back. Maritime Canada, guys, completely underrated. I mean, it's hated by, looked down on by the rest of Canada.
No. Only one part of it gets made fun of regularly. And I haven't heard any of those jokes in a long time. That's the one.
Well, Newfoundland gets made. Right. Well, it's, you guys talk about Newfoundland the way we talk about Appalachia. But let's be, come on, there's no contempt for unemployed fishermen in Nova Scotia. Alicia says no. Ev says yes.
Not contempt is a strong word, but small sense of superiority, sure. Like, us people, the elite from the town, the cities, and those who we have to pay for because they only work during the summers.
Are you acknowledging this, Alicia, or dissenting?
No,
I'm not accusing you of it. I'm just saying
either.
Different upbringings.
The truth is, I didn't grow up in the city either, but those are the people who run our governments.
Like, that's why we're getting the Conservatives.
All right, I will just say the prejudice exists enough for it to have migrated down to here. Hello, Anna Bauer.
Hello.
Joining us.
Sorry to join you at the last minute.
Joining from Fort Pierce, Florida.
With the beach in the background.
Yeah, just as we were discussing maritime provinces, which...
Perfect timing.
So, Anna, what are you doing in Fort Pierce?
So, I am also sorry.
This is the first ever time somebody has joined us during her morning run.
So I'm in Fort Pierce because Judge Cannon is holding a hearing later today on issues that seem a little bit not, it could have just been decided on the papers, but one is whether Trump should be allowed to intervene to block Volume 2 of the special counsel's report. The report is on the classified documents case. Of course, Volume 1 has already been released. And then the other issue is the motion in the main that was brought was by Nada and De Oliveira, Trump's co-defendants, who similarly are seeking to block the release of the classified documents report.
And just to be clear, Anna, who is proposing, other than me, who FOIA'd it, to release the classified documents report?
Department of Justice. It's no longer the special counsel's office that will be arguing this
No. The Department of Justice has promised not to release the special.
So when I said release, what I meant is release it to members of Congress, because the kind of situation that the Justice Department, or the arrangements that the Justice Department has made decisions about with these two volumes of the report, respectively. Volume 1 was released to the public, but then Volume 2, they want to hand it over to congressional leaders. That would be the ranking member and the chair of the House and Senate Judiciary Committees. So it would not be released in the sense that it would be released to the public. It would be released to members of Congress.
All right. Well, we will await with bated breath. Just to antagonize our Canadians, what's the temperature there?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if you were talking
to understand
the
it
Canadians.
anyway.
No, we're antagonizing the Canadians.
So it actually is a little bit chilly right now because of the wind, but I think that it is like 58 degrees right now
So
because of the
20
wind.
degrees
But
Celsius.
it is supposed to be much warmer tomorrow, which I will be here for part of the day tomorrow before my flight. Because there's not a whole lot of flights going out from that are available from West Palm Beach to DC, and you've got to wonder if it's because of the inauguration coming up. Um, but but yeah, so I think tomorrow is supposed to be a high of 80, but today it's only like high of 65, 70.
All right. Antagonism for the Canadians duly accomplished. Um, Anna, thank you for joining us from your morning run. Um, Alicia, thank you for popping in so that I'm not alone. I appreciate that. I don't like the days when I show up and I'm all by myself on the show. Ev, thank you for showing up. And yes, we have duly noted and we will transmit to the Trump administrations that
Actually, no,
Canadians
it's just the
have
rest of
our
NATO that I care about right
backs.
now. I think
Um,
that ship has sailed. I'm a little bit worried about you.
No, but I can't, like, I don't have a direct line to the rest of the NATO countries, but I can publish. Um, and Richard Wattenbarger, thank you for showing up and asking a question and guiding the whole discussion. You were the one who turned the subject to Canada from Pennsylvania. Um, uh, a model to you all of how the audience here is supposed to behave, particularly when I'm on my own. Just show up and get the conversation started. We will be back Tuesday, day one of the apocalypse. By the time you next hear from me, um, the world will have ended, and I will be hanging in a hammock in the end times, and you'll be right here with me. Talk to you later, guys. Thank you all.